Life's a funny thing. Some of us are dealt some pretty cruddy cards, and then we're expected to just grow up. Normal. That leaves a lot of us to struggle as we navigate through life's difficult times. And if you're anything like me, you have no idea what the hell normal is. Welcome to the Wishbone Podcast with me, your host, Luca Ohana, as we discuss and share our life stories in hopes of helping each other out. So if you got 30 minutes, let's talk about it. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. The third episode here on the Wishbone Podcast, and I'm super excited to be here. I'm your host, Luca, and I've been having actually a ton of fun. A lot more nervous than I thought I was going to be, but it is weird talking to yourself in what I'm going to call my studio, and that's graciously calling it a studio. But it's weird talking to yourself about yourself to yourself, and so you can get over that, then I should be okay. But yeah, I've been actually enjoying it. The process is fun. I'm starting to get much greater idea of how I want the show to run and kind of the layout. So any ideas, suggestions, I'm very open to it. But I still think that it's going well. So with that being said, last week's question was, is life on a scale, or is it black and white? And I kind of answered it at the end of the last episode, but I do not believe in black and white for, I'd say, 99.9% of things in life and, the visible reality that we all have. I just don't see how anything could be that stark of a contrast. So I definitely think everything's on a scale. I mentioned last time that sex and gender, happiness, prosperity, it's all on a scale. I would even go as far as saying that Trump, I'm sure at some point in his life, was a pretty decent feller. Now, that might cast some shade, and you guys might not like that, but hey, that's what opinions are for. They're to be shared and discussed and civilly, at least here in America, civilly talked about. So if that causes your blood to boil, come at me, but let's just expect to have a discussion. Okay? So anyway, with that being said, I do want to give you guys an anecdote, kind of express and underline why I feel like life is expressed as some sort of sliding scale. The last couple episodes, I'm not sure the gist that you have received about my father, but I imagine he's painted in somewhat of a poor light. And that's not my intention. Really, my intention is just to speak facts. But that kind of leads to my point of everything being on a scale. So my father, yes, was a brute of a man, and his heavy-handed parenting definitely led to struggles for emotional struggles and mental struggles for myself and my siblings. But at the same time, the irony being he was my hero. So I do remember one time I was staying with my grandmother, waiting for my dad to pick me up, and we were in this big apartment complex right off of Redwood Road, for those of you who know where that is, in Glendale, Utah. And the neighbor that shared the back wall of my grandmother's apartment was just wailing on this woman. I'm not sure if he was married to her or they were dating, whatever the case is, but it was a very distinct sound of someone getting punched and kicked, and he had these very aggressive growls and grunts, and she was getting thrown against a wall and was just whimpering. It was just, it's one of those disgusting sounds that you hear. And at the time, I must have been 7 or 8, and I just, I felt helpless. And I looked at my grandma, and all she could say really was, "Poor thing." And I just remember feeling so helpless, and I wanted to help her, but I was terrified. And then all of a sudden, there's my dad in the doorway, and he's got this kind of confused look on his face, and he says, "What's going on?" And my grandma said, "He's really laying into her." And then he was gone. My dad was gone. My grandmother's apartment was on the third story, and they had these cement stairs that had that were attached to metal railings, and so you just hear these footsteps, this very frantic pace, just da 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 as he goes down the flights of the stairs, and you don't hear anything for a little bit, and then you hear the same sound more distant because he's now crossed to the other side of the apartment complex, and now he's flying up the three flights of stairs, and then boom, 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 boom. You just hear this huge knocking on the door. He stops. The guy who's hitting the female just stops and screams, what the fuck? What do you want? And boom, 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 boom. So the guy finally opens the door, and my dad, in this very deep, calm voice, said, "You like hitting women? Hit me." And then you heard the same sounds, which is so ironic that the same violence was, in one sense and in one second prior to this, scary and disgusting, but then somehow it got transformed to being this heroic thing. Just thinking about that right now. But anyway, then my dad wails into this guy, and my dad is a martial artist. He's trained his entire life practically. He is very proficient with his hands and his his body. So he laid into that guy. The lady, I don't remember if she screamed for help or asked him to stop or left. But he came back, and his knuckles were all red, and he just calmly said, "Grab your jacket." We left. And I remember on the way home in the car, I was looking at my dad thinking, that's my dad. That guy is a badass. And that's why you don't hit women. I remember that very clearly, thinking, that's a man that has standards, and it underlines the reason why you don't hit women or children. Mind you, he beat the shit out of us. But in that moment, I'm obviously a hypocrite, but it's not something that you think about. That it's not the dichotomy isn't weighed in your mind, especially at that age. But I do remember he just looked like this amazing hero to me, and it underlines the son wanting to be his father. So very, very interesting. And when I was thinking about the story I was going to tell to answer last week's question, it really kind of underlined the point that sometimes we, because we are living on this floating scale, this sliding scale, we don't always come across the way we want. And so sometimes my dad shone through as this great man, this hero, and other times he's shown through as a lost man, someone who's broken and struggling. And it's just very interesting how that scale slides and who perceives what, depending on where you are on that slide, on that scale. So very interesting. I couldn't tell you that my dad's a bad man, and I couldn't tell you that he's a good man. And I think that is the human condition. So with that being said, I wanted to get into part 3 of Who I Is, which is just an introduction of who I am and who I is. And so today's topic is going to be my OI, specifically about OI, the type that I have, and kind of how I came to be diagnosed with that. So like I previously have stated, OI stands for Osteogenesis Imperfecta, and it is a bone disease that is really, from my understanding, based on the fact that people who are inflicted with this disease cannot create a certain collagen properly. Now, I don't know if that's in vitro while we're being carried by our mothers, or if that is something that we continuously malform throughout our lives. I do know that we do have a family history on my dad's side of it. My dad has had a lot of breaks under his belt, but again, he comes from a school of hard knocks, so I don't think he would have necessarily said that something was wrong with his bones. My Aunt Wendy has issues. Her children have bone issues. My grandmother pretty much had no teeth. I'm not sure how far up it goes, but uh, we always had dental issues. And so it was always kind of confusing as to what was causing it. Was it the physical abuse that our family from generation to generation passed on, or was it just malnourishment, or was it some underlying bone disease? It was funny when I reached out to a cousin of mine just recently. I said, "Hey, I just found out that we have OI," and she's like, "Oh yeah, yeah, the whole family has it." So I just felt like I was the only one out on the meeting on that one. But anyway, so people who have OI, there's 8 different categories, 8 different types, and it can range from mild, such as the case with me, or very severe, where you don't live past birth, you live very shortly after birth, or your life can be very, very difficult with rods being needed, uh, curved bones, wheelchairs, not making it to double digit as far as years go. So it can afflict a wide range of people. It, as far as I know, isn't necessarily tied to a certain race of people or a certain type of people, but it is just one of those ailments that affects your bones. And like previously stated, it can also have a sister diagnosis or sister ailment that affects your teeth. That can be dentinogenesis imperfecta, and we'll get into that in a second. Some other symptoms are blue sclera, where your eyes, the whites of your eyes appear to be blue. We don't have that. You can also lose your hearing quite readily. That could happen soon for some reason. I'm not too sure on that one. But I have good hearing. I did try to get some hearing aids, mainly because you can listen to music at work, and they're Bluetooth and they're pretty awesome. But I failed to fail the hearing test, so unfortunately I didn't get the hearing aids. But who knows? I'm getting old. So my mother being very young when she was pregnant with me, it was a very difficult birth, extremely so, and so she had to have an emergency C-section. And at the time that I was born, the doctor used forceps and actually collapsed my skull. And so, what turned into kind of a high risk pregnancy turned into a very high risk delivery. And I ended up having to be medevaced from one hospital to another hospital. Primary Children's Hospital is the hospital that I had to be flown to, and they saved my life. So, I had to have 2 craniectomies where they cut holes into my head to relieve the pressure in my skull. And from what I've been told, I did die twice during that process of being born and was fortunately brought back. Um, I did acquire my hospital records from Primary Children's, but St. Mark's Hospital, which is where I was born, somehow they decided that after a certain amount of time, I think it was 15 or 20 years, they would burn their records. And I don't have the best fondness for St. Mark's. Both my sons were born there as well, and we had issues with their births as well. Um, but one of the greatest people I know is a nurse there, and has been a nurse for 40 years. And if she works there, I would, I would, I have a lot of confidence in her, is what I'm trying to get at. But anyway, so yeah, they had to do 2 craniectomies on my skull, and to this day, I still have a really big dent in my head. I've had classmates come up and grab my skull and jerk back in disgust as they weren't ready for the divots in my skull. I did end up losing my hair later on in life, and that was the most depressing part. As when I was going through some treatments, I lost my hair, and I was not anticipating that. I wasn't also anticipating the main big scars that I had on my skull. So I think I was in like 8th grade when I cut my hair short enough. I had finally acquired the confidence to do that, and I discovered scars. So I have 2 scars right above my ears on both sides, and then I have probably an 18-inch scar that is crescent shaped from the base of my hairline the back of my hairline to it goes up toward the top of my head, the crown of my head, and then it kind of curves around to the right side. And that's where they kind of filleted my scalp open and did the craniectomies. And what was interesting reading the birth records, or rather the hospital records, is that they didn't use sutures. I mean, I guess when you're an infant, you don't want to use sutures. They use surgical tape, I think, is what they said in the notes. But what's interesting is in the surgical notes, the doctor had suggested a possible diagnosis of OI. And if I had read those documents prior, I would have kind of been keyed into it a little bit sooner. But I didn't acquire those medical records until much later. I was already in my 20s by the time I got them. And what struck me, though, reading those papers, is just how close I came to death and how close I came to being affected with my mental capabilities. I mean, you're talking about your brain is swelling and it's hitting a hard case. They have to cut the case to let the swelling dissipate. And I will imagine your brain is so sensitive that any damage to it could have caused long-term repercussions. I mean, of course, I would say I'm pretty dumb now, but I'm saying physically or mentally disabled was a high possibility, considering how high risk that surgery was. Okay, so growing up, I didn't have the best parents, so there's a couple times where some of my ER notes showed that I had rotten teeth. I do remember having all my teeth capped as a kid, and it's because I was going to bed with juice, I guess, as a bottle. But some of those notes had indicated physical abuse, which is interesting. Um, at that time, even, and that was when my mom and my dad were still together. That was prior to my younger brother being born, or right as he was born. So I was pretty young. A year old to 2 years old for sure. And then, so growing up, I did practice martial arts with my dad. My dad was heavy handed, so I did suffer breaks, but I never associated with anything. The biggest break that I can think of, the first big break I had was I was on a trampoline at maybe 2 years old, 3 years old, and my arm slipped between the springs as my cousins were jumping, and then as the springs contracted, it snapped my arm. It wasn't anything gruesome, it just hurt. I remember it hurting a lot, and it was kind of red and puffy, and lo and behold, it had broken. And then my next big break happened when I was about, I don't know, 10 maybe, and a friend of mine and I were jumping from a fire hydrant onto this tree. And it was springtime. So every time we jumped on this branch, it would rain these blossoms. It was gorgeous. Okay. So that's why we did it. So this next time, he and I decided to do a super jump. We jumped off the fire hydrant together. I ended up doing a full flip in the air and landed between on the grass and on the sidewalk. So my left arm had landed halfway on the grass and halfway on the sidewalk, which was kind of up a little higher than the grass. And I remember laughing so hard. I can't believe I just did that. And then I started to notice my arm wasn't really working. So I looked down at it and it looked like the freaking scar on Harry Potter's forehead. It was zigzagged and then zigzagged again. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be a freak. And that's what caused me to cry. There wasn't any pain associated with it that I remember. I just remember thinking, no more. And so I ran home with my forearm 2 inches from my nose, the entire however many blocks it was. And I won't ever forget this. I come up to the front door, the screen door, I knock and I open it, and it was locked. So my sister Jessica opened it, and the look she gave me, you could tell. If you couldn't tell that I was a freak by then, the look she gave me was all the proof I needed. The look was like, "Dear God, you're a freak. Hope you're okay." So my dad came around the corner, saw, and we jumped into the car and drove to the ER, where they had to put me in traction rather, and pull my arm a little bit so they could set the bones. And then I had to wear a ice cast for 24 hours to let the swelling go down. And for all my efforts, I got this cool little black car to play with. So take us 24 hours ahead in the future. And my brother Ray's like, "Hey, let me play with your car." And I'm like, "No, dude, you got to go break your arm if you want to play with this car." So he goes off to the same fire hydrant and comes back with his arm in front of his face. And my cousin Sione and I, or my neighbor Sione and I, were like, "Oh my God, you actually broke your arm?" And he's like, "Nah, nah, nah, just kidding." I'm like, "Oh, whatever, you're a loser. Get away from us." I shit you not. He comes back like 2 minutes later holding the arm the exact same way I did and had, so my break, I broke both the ulna and the radius. I broke them twice each, so 4 breaks total. Ray came back and had broke his ulna once, but it was cracked up like a little peak of a mountain. And oh my gosh, the look on my dad's face, he was pissed. He let us he gave us a verbal beating that day. Um Kind of interesting. So my sister and I had casts on the same time. We bonded over that. It was pretty funny. And she did not get a black card, believe it or not. And she did break her arm, so I think that's a little messed up. A couple other things. For some reason, I'm hyper flexible with the OI or hyper flexible along with the OI. And some of the issues I experienced with that is my shoulders would dislocate frequently. Um, and dislocations at the time were the most painful thing I had ever experienced. I mean, any break does not compare to a shoulder dislocation. A broken nose, a broken jawbone, cheekbone does not compare to a dislocated shoulder. And from what I can remember from most of my dislocations that were complete. Now, if they were partial where they would either somewhat come out of the joint or come out and go back in, they were painful and sore, but they weren't treated the same way as complete dislocations. And from what I understand, complete dislocations, they had to be, uh, they had to pull your arm out of where it was stuck and pop your shoulder back into place. And I wasn't able to get pain meds at that point until they were able to do that due to nerves. They didn't want to pinch a nerve or something. So I just remember, you're up against this bar tight and tight, and they fucking yank your arm. It's just incredibly painful. I'm just drenched in sweat. So every time I dislocated my shoulder, it it was a complete mess for me. Uh, and so I dislocated my shoulder a lot. I broke bones a lot, and I still didn't get the idea that I had OI. Spring forward a few years, I've had both my boys, and one time, Graham, my youngest, for whatever reason, he was out on the grass, and he's like, "Daddy," he's like 2. He's like, "Look at this," and he jumps straight in the air and then tucks his legs like he's like an L sit, and he just slams his body in the ground, and quickly realizes that was a horrible idea. Instantly reaches for his spine. He's just shattered his spine. He ended up fracturing one of his vertebrae. I believe it was like a T5, T6, something in the mid back. And it was horrible to watch. Obviously, you don't want to see your kids hurt, but it just was a bad idea. You just don't want to jump up and then grab your toes and land on your butt. Horrible. So anyway, that's what happened. By that time, my oldest had broken his arm already. God, this was so bad. We had just gotten home. I had just picked him up from their mom's, and I needed a shower, so they went out to the backyard. I remember distinctly looking at my son and saying, "I'll be right back." And I had gotten to the bathroom, just taking my pants off, when I hear, "Daddy, daddy, daddy." And it's the kind of alert that as a parent, something's wrong. So I run back outside, and I see my son's arm. It's just, you can tell it's broken. He's broken it at 3 different bones. It's zigzagged like Harry Potter's forehead again, that bastard. And I said, "That's broken, so we gotta go." So we jumped into the car, rush over to the ER, and this is one of the greatest stories of my boys out there. So, I'm holding my son the entire time. He's doing a great job, but he's obviously freaked out and he's in pain. And my youngest decides he is going to step up and he's going to be the freaking hero. And so we get out of the car, the water bottle drops, and before I can kind of maneuver my oldest son in my arms to pick up the water bottle, my youngest comes running around the side of the car. "I got it, Daddy, I got it." He picks the water bottle up, he puts it in his arms, and he's bear hugging this thing. There's no way this thing is leaving his side. He's decided this is the most important job in the world. So we get into the reception area. We're trying to get checked in. The nurse comes in and is asking us, "Hey, what happened?" And then here comes my youngest out from behind me. Okay, so here's what happened. Erwin, he was trying to do a super speed and he slipped doing a cartwheel and he broke his arm. Oh. And the nurse like, "Oh, wow, okay, you got it. We'll get you guys admitted." A couple minutes later, the doctor comes, same story. "All right, I'm so sorry you broke your arm. What happened?" Here comes Graham, same story. Erwin, he's doing super speed. He slipped, doing a cartwheel, broke his arm. So just horrible. So they take him to x-ray, get his arm set and all that. Doctor comes back, and instead of talking to me, now he's talking to his 2-year-old brother because he's now commanded the attention. And he goes, "Well, good news, your brother's going to be okay." And Graham let out this sigh and then threw up. So he'd been carrying all that weight on his tiny little shoulders. And it was a beautiful moment. And then I cried because the boy's mom had finally come, and it was finally my time to kind of let go and release. Because it was my first time I'd see my son break a bone, and that was hard. He later ended up breaking his bone again, and then again. So he broke his left arm 3 times, and Graham has broken his arms, his left arm twice, his right arm once. And then subsequent other bones too, like Graham broke his foot once. One other thing that I'll talk about with the OI real quick is that we can develop these malicious, vicious cramps, something that is just not part of this world. It is like a freaking, it's horrible. A lot of these cramps for some of the OI people, it will actually break their femur. They're that powerful. And my hunting buddy B, he's a brother in arms for sure. I love you guys real quick. He got to see my muscles kind of freaking out and gyrating and all that as we were hiking out during a hunt once. But I had a cramp so bad that it tore the tendons off of my bones. I thought I had snapped my femur. I don't know how. It just happened. And the doctor's like, "Well, did you get hit by a car?" I'm like, "No, I just am in the most pain I've ever been." Some of these cramps will feel like they're going to rip. For the you men out there, you'll understand. It felt like it was going to rip my growing out and place it next to my knee. It just was severe pain. It's the worst pain I've ever been in, and I've been in quite a bit of pain, but it's a 10 out of 10 easily for me. I've pulled my own teeth. I've broken bones. There's nothing that comes close to these cramps. I'm telling you, these cramps are vicious. Like full on sweat. And then I start believing in God all of a sudden. Imagine that. I'm like, "Dear God, please, what help, man?" I don't even know what to say. But anyway, so these cramps are pretty vicious. That's another typical thing that people with OI can get. Yeah, so it's vicious. But I would love to hear back from anybody who has OI, any similar stories. I've mentioned that I did join a support group, and it's been a good thing to hear the stories on there. I definitely count my blessings as far as that goes. But it can be a vicious, vicious disease, mainly for those who are terrified of cramps, such as myself. But yeah, pretty nuts. Now we're going to get into the last segment of the show, gray matters, and I'm going to hit you with a doozy, and I can hope you guys can imagine my answer, but you guys will hear my answer next week. But the gray matters question of the week is, do you believe in God? And with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. Well, that's it, folks. Thanks for stopping by. Make sure to check out the show notes. As always, let's give them something to smile about, and we'll see you guys next week.